Don't believe the hype. Read the type. This is TYPBST.
Take a look, it's in a book. It's TYPBST, baby.
Yo, you're giving our audience some performance exemplary, tactics to just, if they ever want to become an artist, they gotta use your intro energy to really mimic it.
Man, I'm just excited that we're doing another TYPBST episode. TYPBST is where we look at books that's influencing the way we see politics, theology, economics, the country. Yeah, so I'm always excited to get into a good book that's impacting the way we think.
Yeah, man, and I'm sure the listeners might have noticed a little bit more reading on your end than my end, but I got a few books let's say I'm working through. Plus, kids are getting a little older. I don't quite have the crazy years. I mean, it's still a little tough, but yeah, definitely young children was a burden on my reading time.
Yeah, I've heard, man. Yeah, no, I've had a lot of downtime to read. Yeah. So I'm really excited to share what I'm learning. I'm always looking to talk to have a discussion about some of the stuff, some of the books and some of the literature, and sharing the knowledge. Yeah, so today we'll be getting into
The End of Gender
by Dr. Deborah Sho. So Dr. Deborah Sho is a neuroscientist who specializes in gender, sex, and sexual orientation. She received her doctorate from York University.
Oh,
Go Lions.
no, don't count that against her.
York University in Toronto. I worked as an academic researcher for 11 years. As a journalist, Sho writes about the science of human sexuality, gender, and politics, and hosts the Dr. Deborah Sho podcast. Follow her on social media at Dr. Deborah Sho and visit her at drdeborahsho.com. Yeah, so I can't remember how I stumbled across this book. I think it was through True North, and I think Candace Malcolm was doing an interview with her, and it popped up, and I was like, "Oh, this seems pretty interesting." And I was like, "Oh, she's Canadian," and it's kind of weird because anytime I see Canadian writers or political scientists or journalists, I'm always just intrigued to say, "Oh, there's people from."
Canada,
Our neck of the wood, or even because Canada's a big place, but from our neck of the woods, making a big splash in politics and in the way people think. So I thought her arguments and her train of thought was pretty helpful, and so I was like, okay, let me look into the book. So I was reading. Yeah, I read her book, and it was pretty good. It was pretty good.
Nice. Yeah. I think I found out about her probably I think I saw her on Joe Rogan.
Okay, that too.
Or
Yeah,
something like that, like 3-4 years ago. Like,
or was she on Rubin? Was she on Rubin Report as well?
Maybe it was Rubin. You're right. It might have been Dave Rubin's the Rubin Report.
Yeah, but she was on what's his name's as well.
Rogan.
Yeah, it was on Rogan's as well.
Yeah. I don't remember which one was the beginning for me. I probably took in both after finding the other. But yeah, no, she's been good. I think when she came up previously, I almost want to say it was a little bit more about focusing on the transgender stuff as opposed to any other.
Yeah, she was on both.
Any other aspect of this conversation. So yeah, no, I'm excited to learn from you, from her book. I'll have it in the show notes page. There's a podcast she was recently on, like end of 2021, with Babylon Bee, and so I thought for our audience that's probably a pretty good content to hear her discuss the book as well. If you're looking for more content from her specifically about this book.
Yeah. Part of the reason why I read the book, I got the book was, I'm teaching sociology, psychology, and anthropology at a Christian school, and yeah, these issues came up, man. These issues came up, and the students, have really great questions, and I don't have really good answers. So I don't know, man. I don't know. But we had good conversations, and I was like, okay, you know what? This summer I need to improve. I need to get better. So I read it, and it was good. It was good. So basically, the tagline is, well, the title is "The End of Gender," and then the tagline is debunking the myths about sex and identity in our society. And so I'll preface this, and she prefaces this all the time when she's about to talk about her book or whatever the case may be. And she's not writing the book from a perspective of attacking um, the LGBTQ um, community, specifically the transgender community. So she came up. She had a lot of friends, gay friends, growing up. She was a feminist, and yeah, so her heart definitely goes out to those communities, and she makes she's always clear to make sure that the book isn't used to attack transgender rights or to attack the community. But she says, like, because science has become very politicized, it's important to have a balanced conversation about the science of what's going on. And so she felt the need, from her background, studying sexology, to show what the science teaches on the issue. So again, yeah, she's not trying to tear down the community, but she actually writes this book to actually help the community, to defend children who are going through gender dysphoria, and so forth. And she's arguing that the politicizing of these gender issues isn't actually helpful for whether it's gay children or children that want to transition. And she's saying, like the politics is actually hurting them, and so she's writing this to defend them. And so for me, I thought that was attractive, in the sense that she wasn't coming at it in the stance of saying, "Oh, this is nonsense. What these guys are experiencing isn't real." And so she's not saying that. She's saying, "Okay, look, well, let's actually help them. Let's not just politicize the situation. Let's actually think about how in economic terms, the you have the sorry, what's the word, in when it comes to policies, the direct and the indirect
Yep.
consequences of some of these ideas." And so she unpacks that, and so she does a really good job with it from a scientific perspective. But
Yeah.
also, Joel, I'd also want to just make a quick segue and a quick plug for another book I read, Love Thy Body, answering hard questions about life and sexuality, by Nancy Pierce. And this is more from a Christian perspective and a philosophical perspective, unpacking the roots of how we got here with where we are in regards to how we see gender and sex. So that one was philosophical, and this one is more biological, more scientific. So that was, and both of them were very helpful. But yeah, so maybe, who knows? Maybe, if the listeners are interested, we can possibly do a type beast on Love Thy Body, which was also really good.
So, for the the non-Christian, would the Love Thy Body sort of be a constant battle with the text? Was it like, is it, very explicitly Christian, or would it be sort of giving a Christian worldview on the issue? Do you know what I mean? Like, in terms of differentiating between those two, the way I
Uh,
tried to word it.
Love Thy Body, you mean?
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry. What were you asking?
So for Love Thy Body, you said was from more of a Christian perspective. For the non-Christian, would that book sort of like if they were trying to read it, would it feel like they were sort of constantly battling with the issue, or would it feel like in the sense of battling to be like, oh, I don't believe this, I don't believe this, I don't believe this, or would it be worded in a bit more of like, let's say, conveying why a Christian would view things a certain way?
Yeah, well, what Nancy Pearcey does in that book is trace thought process. So she's a disciple
Mm.
of Francis Schaeffer, who wrote How Should We Then Live? If I have it here, and so how should we then live? The rise and decline of Western thought and culture, and so she's a disciple of him. So the book kind of feels like this one,
Mm.
but
Okay.
but from a sexual perspective, right?
Mm.
And so
Okay.
for the unbeliever who's reading it, it's not like, oh, come to Christ. It's more
Yeah.
like, let's follow this train of thought. We already know what the culture thinks, and so she's just following the train of thought. And and especially if you're a visual learner, she has some visuals, which I loved, the visuals to help you see the train of thought in the sexual, in the secular perspective. And then she says, okay, well, here's the Christian alternative, and here's how Christians have seen it. So, and I'm
Hmm.
sure for unbelievers who don't know the Christian perspective, and all you know is the secular perspective, and it leads to, and they already know where that leads to, right?
Yep.
Unbelievers know where this conversation goes and where it ends. But now you have unbelievers who don't necessarily agree with the LGBTQ narrative, but don't know where to go. And so I think "Love Thy Body" would be helpful in helping them see other nuances to the conversation.
Okay. Nice. No, that's good. Now, I'm always, whenever we do these episodes, I'm always big on like, I gotta have the table of contents open. I'm looking at it. Just, I'm sort of taking a piece out of How to Read a Book. As sort of like, here's the roadmap that the author was trying to do, and I'm curious for you, or sorry, the first thing would be the intro, or it's not really the first. Yeah, the introduction is titled "The Battle Against Biology."
Mhm.
And the idea being that sort of resonates with what you were saying, right? She wrote this book sort of like to make the biology arguments, the science arguments, not to go against any particular, view on transgender or any other aspect of gender, right? Let's start with the science and unpack it. And I see that from the way that she's titled the introduction. So the structure of this book looks like there's 3 sections: the foundation, then it talks about 3 myths; the frontier, 3 more myths; the future, 3 more myths; and then her conclusion. And I'm just curious what your take on, let's say, the idea of like every chapter is, for the most part, addressing myths. Do you think that was a good structure? Do you feel like that was helpful?
Sorry, can you repeat that again, Joel? I kind of cut out a bit.
So, in the table of contents, she's got her 9 myths listed as really the major structure to the book. And I'm curious, from your take, for you, did you find that helpful?
Joel, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're chopping in and out here. We'll figure this out. Yes. All right, Darnell's back.
Yeah, go ahead.
So looking at the structure of this book, right? It's those 3 sections with 3 myths within each section. Did you find that myth approach, right? 9 myths is really the foundational structure of her book, at least based on the table of contents. Would you say that was a helpful approach?
Oh yeah. It's like a sermon outline. It's funny because I laugh. I laugh. I look at the table of contents. I'm like, oh, this woman is a logical thinker. Like, it's just really well laid out, very organized. Yeah, so I found it very helpful, and I thought you know the myths were very helpful way to label the chapters, so that way you can kind of pick and choose what issue you wanted to resolve for yourself first.
Yeah. So that how to read a book, navigate it as you wish. That sort of structure helps in that regard. If you want to focus on myth number 5, which I don't even know. Oh yeah, we're going to talk about that one. You can jump right into that chapter. Probably, I would guess reading the introduction first would probably be helpful just to get the groundwork.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, basically every chapter is sort of fair game. It sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So, for a Christian who wants to read this book, what would you say is like, I don't want to say like the right type of apologetic, but what type of whether apologetics or let's say a parent who's going through certain things, who would you say this book would be helpful for?
Everybody.
It's fair. And I'm assuming that's just because the current climate and debate, it just speaks to it really well.
Everybody. Yeah, everybody. It's for everybody, man. Rated E for everybody.
All right. So let's jump into it. I think for was it 2 chapters and the conclusion that we're going to focus on, with respect to how
Sort
we
of.
go through this?
So we're gonna look at myth 1, biological sex is a spectrum, and then where's myth number 5? Myth number 5 is children with gender dysphoria should transition, and then myth number 7, women should behave like men in sex and dating.
Yeah. Okay, that's right. Three myths. So technically, would those myths be like? Would myth 5 be chapter 5, or is it slightly different than that?
Yes,
Okay.
it would.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Cool. So basically, an introduction, 9 chapters or 9 myths, and a conclusion is the structure of this book. So, myth 1, obviously, she found it to be I don't want to say the most important, but top of the list or starting point. I presume there's a level of resonance with you as to why you would have picked it as one of the ones to focus on for our discussion. So, what did you find helpful about myth 1 being addressed, i.e., biological sex is a spectrum?
Yeah, so the reason why this is important is because the issue of sex versus gender, those two terms get inflated. And so what she does is brings clarity to that discussion, because I didn't realize what the exact difference was. And so she definitely nuances it, which is foundational for any discussion on it. And so here's an excerpt from the book, and she says, biological sex is neither is either sorry biological sex is either male or female. Contrary to what is commonly believed, sex is defined not by chromosomes or our genitalia, or hormonal profiles, but it's made up of gametes, which are mature reproductive cells. Uh, there are only 2 types of gametes. Small ones called sperm are produced by males, and large ones called eggs that are produced by females. There are no intermediate types of gametes between egg and sperm cells. Sex is therefore binary. It is not a spectrum.
That's interesting. It's almost like it's another layer deep, i.e., the science, in terms of defining male and female, right? Because I don't know, I haven't watched it yet. I'm intending to watch the documentary "What Is a Woman," but my understanding, one of the trailers I saw in it was, going to, let's say, a third world country and saying, asking them that question, and the way that they would define it is based on sex organs, right? Oh, women have breasts, men have penises, or whatever, right? Whereas it's a good sort of differentiation that you're pointing out, that she actually goes to like a very biological level of essentially reproductive cell production.
Yeah, because genitalia can get kind of dicey when you get into intersex, people who are intersex, which he gets into in the book. And intersex is also known as the politically incorrect term hermaphrodite.
Okay.
Right. So that's why she says, yeah, like, yeah, you don't want to use genitalia for defining if a person's a male or female. But like you said, yes, she uses the idea of gametes, which I didn't even know what a gamete was until I read the book, and I was like, oh, okay, all right, makes sense. Sperm, eggs, okay, fine. And so that there is no transitional, there is no transition from sperm to egg or egg to sperm. It's just either or. And then she goes on to say, by contrast, she's talking about gender now. By contrast, gender identity is how we feel in relation to our sex. Right. So I'll say that again. I'll also say this about the book. It was very confusing. I got, it is very, very confusing. Not because she's making it confusing, but because you have to, especially, as a heterosexual male, um, you only see life in your terms. You've only interpreted life in your way of thinking. And so, you really have to slow down. So as I'm talking, I'm gonna say things over, because sometimes, okay, anyways, you'll see it. But I'm
Yep.
gonna go slow, and you have to really think through what she's saying. It's kind of like math. You got to think through. No, you got to
No,
think
because
it
when you
through.
say that, math to me is like, I don't think, dude, I just do it. So, but I know what you're saying, right? Like in
Yeah,
general, math, it's
yeah,
complex. You need to pay attention to the details and
yeah, and
make
then
sure
add
things
it
are in the
up,
right
and
place.
add
And
it up. Just
yep,
add it
yep,
up, right? Okay,
yep.
so now we're talking about gender. So by contrast, gender identity is how we feel in relation to our sex, regarding whether we feel masculine or feminine. Gender expression is the external manifestation of our gender identity. I'll say that part again. Gender expression is the external manifestation of gender identity, or how we express our gender through our appearance, like clothing and hairstyle choices, or mannerisms.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good sort of, but there's two terms there, right? There's gender identity and gender expression. And I sort of like the connection, the way that she's, drawn the connection between the two. Um, and then, for it, I see, in your notes that you shared with me, you've got this header of like sex versus gender. Is that sort of a theme throughout this chapter of like
Yes.
differentiating? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, differentiating between the two. And then she goes on to say, similar to sex, gender, both with regard to identity and expression, is biological. And so this is important, because then she gets into the debate about nature versus nurture. So again, I'll read that part again. Similar to sex, gender, both with regard to the identity and expression, is biological. It is not a social construct, nor is it divorced from anatomy or sexual orientation, despite what contemporary scholars may have may have see you believe may have you to see you believe of these things are very much linked. So biology, not society, dictates whether we are, and this is a key word, gender typical or gender atypical. The extent to which we identify as the sex we were born as, and the partners we are sexually attracted to, right? So gender expression is the um, external manifestation of our gender identity. But I think the key two terms I just want to unpack is gender typical and gender atypical.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so this is important, and this is important to the discussion. And I think this is where I think culturally uh, we've dropped the ball, just as a culture, as a society. So for example, you have gender typical, right? Masculine men, feminine women. That's typical. And then atypical, the prefix, the Latin prefix a, the negative, is not typical, atypical. And so that's like a feminine man and a masculine woman. And so this is important to nuance. So, for example, um, what usually happens is feminine men, feminine boys get made fun of. Masculine girls get made fun of, right? They're not affirmed, right? You're
Mm.
questioned like, yo, right? You're kind of questioning this guy and his manhood because he's feminine. And so, what the culture has done, the more progressive culture will say, okay, well, we can affirm you,
Mm.
Matt. If you're a feminine boy, maybe you are actually a girl inside, and therefore you should consider transitioning. Same thing with a masculine female. Maybe you're a male inside, so maybe you might want to consider transitioning. And all she's saying, and this is what one of the main arguments she makes. She's like, well, you know, it's not necessary to go to the other side. So you have the binary, right? Male, female, and then you have the third option, which is non-binary. And so she's saying like, there's no need to say, okay, well, non-binary. Let's just affirm the people the way they are. Let's just
Mm.
affirm the people the way they are. And I agree with her on that. I think it's important to like affirm feminine men and masculine women, right? We all we all grew up with people like that. We all
Mhm.
have friends, family, people who are like that. Now the other nuance now is that in some cases they might actually turn out to be gay, but sometimes they're not. Right? Sometimes they're not. But the whole point was just to make sure that that the progressive side might say, okay, I can affirm you, but I think those people who might not be progressive can say, hey, well, we can affirm you as well. Yes, you're a feminine boy, but we still affirm you as a man, a boy. Yes, you're a masculine girl, but we still affirm you as a girl.
Mhm. I think for me, the big thing I took away from this, I don't remember if it was from your notes or the Babylon B podcast that I listened to. The idea that, let's call it the atypical gender, is still a product of your biology,
Hmm.
right? So being a feminine man or a masculine female is dependent upon your genes, is dependent upon your biology.
Yeah, and your exposure to testosterone in the womb.
Right? So there's an aspect of your body's development can
Hmm.
influence that, but that's still biology, right? That's like when we talk about nature versus nurture, we're not talking about nurturing the development of your body. We're talking about the nurturing of your culture or your mental capacities, right?
Hmm.
Like generally speaking, when we talk nature versus nurture, right? We're not, when we talk about nature, we're talking about the body and its natural exposures versus culture is almost a better way of thinking it through nurture. Um, and so I just found that as a very specific identifier that sort of goes against the narrative, right? Like, and along the lines of what you said, because of the way sort of progressives affirm those that would have been bullied because they were atypical, and the lack of affirming leaves them in no man's land to some extent, and left to only going towards a group of people who will affirm them, or there's a draw towards that group of people. So I think that's something that, again, if you take the transgender conversation period and the focus being what does science tell us about what's good or bad about what people are suggesting, like transitioning, right? What does science tell us about the negatives of doing that at a certain age, which we'll get into with myth 5, right?
Hmm.
And so this is another example of where the science can inform us how we should think about gender. And I think the culture or the progressives have just defaulted to, no, it's a spectrum, it's a social construct. We don't talk about biology.
Right. Yeah. But maybe I can jump into this. It might be a little controversial. I don't know if it's too early to get into something controversial. But this book changed, because this is what Type Beast is about, is literature that's kind of changing the way we think. So it's kind of made me reevaluate the way Christians view gender.
Mm.
Right. And I was just like, oh, wait a minute. So if it's, is it okay biblically for a man to be feminine? Is it okay for a woman to be masculine? Right. We got passages like I think Second Timothy talking about, I don't permit a woman to preach. Man is the head of his home. Ephesians 5. Head of the wife, woman's body. Right. And so I
Head coverings.
Head coverings, and I was just thinking about these concepts, and I'm like, okay, so how would this align? And so as I was wrestling with it, and I'm still wrestling with it, but I think one of the things that I'm sure about, and I could be corrected, but one of the things I kind of took away was like, oh, well, okay, well, with Christianity, when it talks about like gender distinction, it usually talks about it in two institutions: the church and marriage.
Mm.
Like the nuance on how we relate to each other. We see that in the church and in marriage, but we don't see it in society, right? So after
It's a
that,
cultural mandate concept.
yeah. So what we see in society is what society determines what is acceptable for a man or a woman to do. But I think one of the things that I think is important that the scriptures does point out for like the man of his home, and like, oh, women are supposed to stay home and take care of the home, and men are supposed to make money. But the scriptures, um, actually, it's a command. One of the commands that's put on the husband is that he share the word with his family.
Mm.
Like, that is a command, whether doesn't matter
Or
how you feel.
responsibility.
Yeah. That you share the word with your family. That I'm sure about. That's what husbands, that's what Christian husbands do. That's what men do. And that's what's put on you. But after that, I'm still kind of working through those ideas, but it's one of those things where I was like, okay, so is it okay if, the woman washes the husband with the word? Right. But I think those examples relate to, right, the sexual biology, and how your gender aligns with. So if you're a male, your sex, you're a male, and then it aligns with your gender, and not just the way you act, the way you your expression, right, your identity, like those things all align. And so with the scriptures, that goes along with it. But just some things I've been working through.
No, and I think it's a fair point that I think maybe many non-Christians or unbelievers wouldn't give credit to a lot of times. Like, I think a lot of unbelievers view Christians as sort of like dogmatic. Not to say that some aren't. And to hear you taking in some information that I don't want to say goes against what you believe, but challenges you, you're sort of going, okay, how does that make me shape my paradigm?
Mm-hmm. And relate, and also relate to what I'm seeing in the culture. So like somebody say, oh, well, yeah, the husband has to be the breadwinner. I said, says who? Like, he has to make the most, right? Well, says who, right? Like, if you're not a Christian, you're not married, and a woman wants to be a CEO, she could be a CEO, right? If she wants to be a head coach of an NBA team, she could do that. Right. But just like we kind of, in the past, we've talked about sphere sovereignty numerous times, right? God has his institutions, um, where he's been explicit institutions. And for those people who aren't part of those institutions, you're free to do. But yeah, yeah, that's just some things I've been wrestling with, and who knows, it'll probably develop.
Yeah, and I
But yeah,
think just the way that I sort of see what you're saying is like the role, the gender role as dictated by scripture speaks mostly to responsibility. It doesn't necessarily speak, and not always, but generally I'm saying it doesn't necessarily speak to execution. Right? So like I can be responsible and delegate at the same time.
Mhm.
Right? And so and the reason I say that is there's an aspect of I can apply the learning that I've just had around execution while still hold on to the gender roles that scripture dictates. In respect to, as you said, in the
Yeah,
institutions of family and church.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I would just say, for a matter of completeness, there are some Christians that do view these, sort of roles going beyond and into
yeah,
society, and have an issue with a female boss. Now, I would
yeah,
say there's no scriptural basis for such a thing, but that's a different conversation.
yeah, yeah. But I'd also like just to quickly add, we did a episode on what's love got to do with it, and I always reference that episode because that episode really changed what I think. And it's important, like, God's laws are not arbitrary, right? They're not random. He doesn't just say, it'd be a good idea if we just did this. Let's try it out. Let's see if it works, right? But there's really deep meaning and practicality to God's laws. And right, kind of, we talk about the spirit and the leather of the law and so forth. But one of the nuances I think about gender roles is important, is it comes back to basic economics, right? In regards to division of labor, right? And that the man and woman are a team, and they both bring something to the table, and that the division of of labor is important to make a home run efficiently,
Mhm.
right? This
Mhm.
is why there's distinction, right? Right. Not everybody, as you know, old saying, too many hands in the pot, right?
Mhm.
There's too many hands in the pot, right? Right. Everybody's playing their role and they're complementing each other. Hence, we use the term complementarian and egalitarianism and so forth. Just quickly, complementarianism is with separate roles but equal in dignity,
Mhm.
separate in duty, equal in dignity. And then the egalitarian is equal in dignity, but interchangeable in duty.
Mhm.
But yeah, I don't want to get too much down that rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But I just wanted, because I threw the term out, I just want to just define
Clarify.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. But let's move on for the sake of time. Uh, so let's move on to myth 5. Children with gender dysphoria should transition. And I just have one. So she gives this one illustration that really rocked me. So she was at a speaking event, and this guy came up to her and was he's familiar with her work, and he was asking her about about well, the guy was telling her, Dr. So, about um, his son who has transitioned to a girl, his son who transitioned into a girl, right? And so he was telling her about it. He's like, oh, my son was acting like this from when he was little. He was putting a towel on his head and pretending he had long hair. He would dress up in his mom's clothes. He would say, I really, why can't I be a girl? I really want to be a girl. And so the father took the son to a doctor who she was familiar with, and she said this, like, internal dialogue. She's like, well, yeah, I know that guy, but he's not really scientific. I know that doctor, I'm aware of his work, but he's not really scientific. And he's just telling the stories, like, yeah, so they put him on puberty blockers. They put the son on puberty blockers, and then started to transition, giving him helping him to transition into a girl. And she says this at the end of the conversation with the guy. She says, in my mind, it was very likely that he did not have a transgender daughter. He had a gay son. And I kind of put the book down. I was like, oh snap. I was like, wait, I think I understand. I understand the argument because, like I said before, because I'm a heterosexual male and I don't live in that world. I don't, I don't have a framework for understanding these arguments, right?
Yeah. And you never had to wrestle with them. Like, it didn't
But
matter.
but
It wasn't
but
relevant to you.
right, but you know what? Too, and another reason why I read this book is because I have friends who have children who are seriously wrestling with the transgender issue, and and I'm seeing my friend. Um, I'm seeing a different side of my friend. I'm seeing him more compassionate. I'm seeing him more considerate. I'm seeing him more gentle, more patient, more inquisitive, more prayerful. And as he's confiding in me, I'm joining him and I'm bearing his burden, and and helping him work through that. Like, it's one thing, when you don't know somebody, and then when you know somebody and you care for them and you love them, and we have friends, we have family who struggle with these things, and your heart goes out to them. So from this day forth, I'm gonna dead that and shoot down that argument that Christians don't care, that we're homophobic and we don't care about people who are trans or people who are gay. Like, that's a lie from the pit of hell, and that's a straw man to the eighth degree, 10th degree, 100th degree, right? That's not the case, because how could yeah, they're still you're still human beings. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
Like,
mhm.
they're still people. Like, come on,
Well,
man. They're
but
not
again,
monsters.
yeah,
They're not monsters.
it's an easy way to dismiss
Yes.
Christians' perspective.
Yes. Then that's a straw man. Yo, if you guys hear people say that, say, yo, man, that's a straw man. Um, yeah, that's nonsense, and your heart goes out to the people. So that was one of the reasons why I read the book, because I was reading it for my friend who's trying to deal with his child, and I was like, okay, you know what? Let me read this and see if this can help. And like, hey, maybe, yeah, sometimes I'm like, yo, maybe you should just listen, just talk with the kid, just hearing him out. But yeah, but the point that she made that really rocked me was that, like, it's one thing. Okay, yeah, okay, we're gonna transition, right, from male to female, which includes, you know, biological changing.
Consequences.
Yeah, like, yeah, messing with your body chemistry, puberty blockers, testosterone, surgery, and all that stuff was not necessary, because at the end of the day, the kid just was just gay. He was just gay. Like, think about that. That's the difference between cutting off your penis and keeping your penis. Cutting off
Yep.
your breast
Yep.
and keeping your breast. Like, like, that's serious.
Yep.
Like, so
Yep.
you're just like, yo, just, yo, let the kid be gay. Chill.
Yep. Yep.
Right? Like, let the kid develop. Let the kid figure it out. But now I understood what the heart of the issue, what she was coming at, was like, oh, wait a minute. This is, and she used the term, I'll probably mention it later on the show, but I want to make sure I mention it. It's a different kind of conversion therapy.
Mm.
She called it conversion therapy, and I was just like, oh shoot, yeah, it's conversion therapy, right? Because the point is, like, yeah, maybe your kid's just gay.
Mhm.
Maybe your kid's just gay. And I was like, oh, I never considered that. And that's what she's fighting for. And she has a lot of gay friends, because that's who she came up with. She has a lot of gay friends who she was friends with, and they reached out to her and they said, yeah, they see a lot of themselves in these young kids who are maybe gay, but are being pushed to transition, because
Mhm.
because the boy's feminine, he really must be a girl. Well, no, he's just gay. So I thought that was very powerful, and really got to
Mhm.
the heart of the issue on defending um those people who can't defend themselves.
Yeah, and I mean that's just one example, right? Like, you gave the example of like the kid turned out, like she viewed the son as like, okay, this sounds like he's gay. And if we take, let's say, some of the femininity away slightly and just talk about the concept of gender dysphoria, right? Like the reason I'm saying is like that was one example, because you can have a scenario where, let's say, a year later the gender dysphoria resolves because that's sort of the norm. If you
Mhm.
started taking actions early in this gender dysphoria, you essentially have made decisions that you can't go back on.
Mhm.
But had you played out the child's mental development and waited, let's say, till they were old enough to actually make this decision for themselves as an adult, you don't really have, not that you couldn't make a decision that's undoable. Like you said, if you decide to cut off your penis, not like you can really put that thing back on. But choosing that for yourself as an adult with a fully developed brain, as opposed to doctors and adults choosing that for a child who, as she put, may have just been gay, or the gender dysphoria example where it resolves, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I my brother's wife was a athletic female, right? Like, my question would be like, could she have, been subject to the point of, convincing her that she should have transitioned? I mean, I don't know her childhood to say that she had any, let's say, opportunity for that. I just know that she was an athletic female, which
Mhm.
to some extent would be a little bit atypical. But yeah, it's just, to me, that's where it is. Like, when you're basically forcing a child to take well, I shouldn't say forcing. When you're putting a child on puberty
Well,
blockers.
okay. So there's a case with this girl named Kira Bell in the UK, and she's suing a medical clinic for um, easily giving her puberty blockers medication to for her to transition. But just so I before I come back to that point, I just want to nuance a point and use a word, because another part about this book, which is very helpful, was the vocabulary. So the vocabulary was very technical, which is helpful for navigating this conversation. And so she used the term desistance. So the myth of desistance. So desistance basically means a kid who wants to transition but doesn't.
So it's
I'm
kind of
just
like
thinking,
resistance.
yeah, desistance.
Okay.
And so the myth of desistance across all 11 long-term studies ever done on gender dysphoric children, between 60 and 90% desist by puberty. 60 to 90% desist by puberty. So desistance refers to the phenomenon of gender dysphoria remitting. A child who has desisted will no longer feel dysphoric about their birth sex. So this is why she's just telling. That's why she's saying, like, look, okay, you want to transition, just give them some time to do that. And so that's what Kiara Bell, the case in the UK, she's suing because she's saying, okay, well, look, at 16, you gave me puberty blockers after um, um, 3 1-hour meetings, and then she was allowed to transition and take medication. But long story short, um, she ended up detransitioning and going back to being a girl. And she was like, you know what, that was very irresponsible for the clinic to hand out that medication after
3
3
hours.
hours of a conversation, right, without parent permission, right? So yeah, it's
Mhm.
fascinating.
Yeah, well, and I mean, the number, 60 to 90% of gender dysphoria resolving and
Hmm.
or assisting,
Hmm.
right? Where the child no longer experiences that,
Hmm.
is a great is what I was saying, right? Like, if you rush this action or decision, you've now, like, I don't know this for sure, but I'm assuming she's suing partly because there's probably consequences on child reproduction. Right? At 16 years old, your
Hmm.
body's developing those things, right?
Yeah.
And now maybe not, maybe that's not part of the lawsuit, but I would assume that's a huge risk. If you gave an 11-year-old puberty blockers, you would potentially prevent any development of those organs, but or I should say, severely hinder the development of those organs, such that
Yeah.
you can't, if you ever wanted to, detransition as she did, um,
Mhm.
you may not be able to have kids if you were a female and you took the hormone blockers early,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
so the consequences of a mistake with a child are so substantive and are also by proxy, right? That's what, for me is concerning, right? Like, I'm concerned about these kids because arguably they're not even old enough to vote, let alone old enough to have a decision like this put on their life, let alone, whether they're the ones making it or not.
Right. And so I think the case in the UK is setting a precedent where they're like, okay, no, no child under 18 can make that decision for themselves. So that's the direction the UK is going. Like, look, if you're under 18, you're not old enough to make that decision. But in the US, it's another ball game. There was a section within this chapter called Political Pawns, and she says there is no such thing as a transgender child. Many people, including parents, annoyingly um, use the term, not knowing there is a difference between being transgender and being gender dysphoric. Transgender is the term, quote unquote, transgender is an identity and political label denoting that an individual identifies as the opposite sex. Children, and particularly prepubescent children, do not possess the emotional maturity identity this way.
To identify this way.
Identify, yeah.
Which I mean, that's a more technical way of saying, I think, what I was trying to say, right? They can't make their mental capacity hasn't developed further enough. This is more emotional maturity is a good, I wasn't even thinking along those lines. I was sort of thinking along the whole, is it hippocampus that doesn't, or whatever, the decision making part of your brain isn't fully developed till 25. I can't remember it might be hippocampus, it might be something else, but anyways, the idea that just hearing that, my thought would be, should doctors be permitted to make this decision before the age of 25? If that's where the, cognitive decision-making part of your brain reaches capacity, let's say, well, I would say, why not 25 as the age where this starts? Now, I just say that as like, argue against that, right? Like, if the brain is fully developed in decision-making at 25, and this is a monumental decision to be made, the way that I would sort of postulate this is like, okay, make the argument for why a younger age would make sense and can be justified even morally, let alone, let's say the consequences of let's call it the right decision. There may be some benefits of doing this early, but the potential consequences in my mind outweigh this on a massive level.
Yeah. I thought this was also a good nuancing of the conversation. So she says this: transgender activists have gained much political ground through use of the narrative that being trans is similar to being gay. A person is born this way. It cannot be changed. And to question this is harmful to a trans person's well-being. The ironic thing is that many of these children are indeed gay. And as we will see, by being persuaded to transition, they are actually undergoing a new form of conversion therapy. And so what she's simply saying is like, okay, well, if there's a such thing as detransitioning, or desisting for kids who are wrestling with it, and then people who actually transition to the opposite sex and then detransition, then she's saying, well, okay, well then, and in her mind, she's saying that being gay is fixed. Like, there's no way you can become ungay. And so in her train of thought, she's saying, well, being gay is fixed, being transgender is not. And so what ends up happening is that there's a shame for people who try to detransition or desist, right? Because kind of like, oh, well, you're affirmed and you're congratulated for transitioning. But then if you detransition, then it puts you in a spot where people are like, well, are we going to applaud you for detransitioning? And then their
Well, I think your point
is
the last point about political pawns is that's why that happens, right? Because if
Right.
they are using
Yeah.
it for political purposes,
Yeah. And
they've
so that
lost
way,
any
yeah.
value.
And so what happens is like, yeah, you're not getting a pat on the back for detransitioning.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so for the people that want to detransition, it's harder to detransition because culturally, um, the same people who are giving you pats on the back are going to start to question your experience, which goes against progressive ideology that you should never question a person's lived experience. But
Mm-hmm.
the contradiction is, okay, now we're going to question a person's lived experience because they're saying, okay, well, yeah, you know what, I want to detransition, right? Um, in that case, but at that to new also, I would just say that I would disagree with Dr. So about people that are gay being gays being fixed. That gay people don't transition. We have Jackie Hill Perry um, was once gay. I think Rosario Butterfield, the author. She's also yeah, she was also gay and is no longer. A guy I used to go to church with. A guy I used to go to church with. He was gay, and it's funny because me and this guy were just talking, just shooting the breeze, just this older gentleman, and quiet guy does this thing, and me and him are talking. Christians. Yeah, man. I used to be out on the streets busting guns, selling crack, and then Jesus saved me. And then he's telling me his story. He's like, yeah, man, I was gay and, I read the Bible, heard the gospel, and I'm not gay no more. And I said, sorry, excuse me?
You just said it like nonchalant.
I
Just
said, excuse me? I was like, what? I said, wait, say that again? He's like, yeah, and I'm not, I was doing that and not doing it no more. And I said, okay, so, like, do you have a blog? Do you have a podcast? Like this kind of stuff is big. And I said, you should be you should be on talk shows or something, or writing a blog or a podcast or YouTube channel. And he was just shy. He just, Darnell, man, I don't want that. I don't need that attention, man. I just want to praise my God and go home.
Hmm.
I don't, yeah, yeah, so but he was just humble about it. He's like,
Yeah.
Darnell, I'm not even trying to go down that road no more. I'm just trying to love my God. And so I'm just saying this because I know some Christian parents are probably listening, and I've been having conversation with a lot of Christian parents about this. You have kids, Joel, right? And so for some Christian parents, like not necessarily you, but some Christian parents don't know what to do because they
Mhm.
don't know these terms. They don't know the nuance of the conversation. They don't know that just like trans kids desist, or trans people detransition, or even gay people are no longer gay, right?
Mhm.
So some the way how the culture would make it is like, okay, well, it's fixed,
Mm.
right? Type of thing. So I think it's just important to say, like, yeah, these people do exist. It's not me in my mind. Like, these people do exist, and they have a testimony. So I think that was important.
So I just wanted to maybe unpack the concept of a new form of conversion therapy. And I think I got it here, but it. I'm sure some people are like, "What are you talking about?" Right. So if I'm not mistaken, this relates to the Canadian Bill C4, which we
Yeah,
did an episode on
yeah.
about
Well, Andre
conversion.
Shooten, lawyer Andre Shooten.
The conversion therapy bill, essentially, related to
Which he talks
yeah,
about.
yes, because she's Canadian, she's aware. um, what's so if I understand correctly, it would be something along these lines. You have let's say a boy who's gay. That boy then becomes a female. So now he's no longer gay. He's a trans female heterosexual. And so that's actually a form of conversion therapy because they're no longer gay, because you've changed one of the, let's say, pieces in order for it to be a gay relationship. And so you're actually converting them from being gay into believing or affirming that they're a female who's attracted to men. So I just thought, it's a little bit of a funky concept, but to me, that's where I think she's going when she makes this argument. And again, it comes back to what you said. She's a very logical, methodical, analytical person.
Mhm.
In the way that she thinks about the science, and she's technically a doctor, as well, which we didn't mention, Dr. Deborah So. And so I just thought, it's if you're thinking about this from a homosexuality conversion therapy perspective, you might be like, I don't understand what's changing. Nothing's changing. But I think that's the logic that she's applying here. And if you truly believe a man can become a woman and a woman become a man, then the term gay has a problem. That she's using this term or she's using this reference to point out the problematic nature with these definitions or terms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. That's good. All right. Myth 7. Women should behave like men in sex and dating. And so
Listen to the rest of this episode on buymeacoffee.com/6cents report. There you'll hear the rest of this episode and others a part of our members only series, Extra Change. You can choose from 3 subscription packages: 2 cents package, which is $2 a month, 6 cents package, which is $6 a month, and our 50 cents package, which is $50 a month. Your support is appreciated and helps improve the show. Remember, 6 cents makes change.
Madden and Mitchell Media.